Today's episode of Vice Versa, we're talking about Tesla recycling nearly all of their used batteries, Cybertruck delays, California hydro plants shutting down due to droughts, and Tesla's White House snub, and much more. And as usual, I'm joined by the man himself, Ricky Roy. How you doing, Ricky?
Doing well, Matt. Doing well. The stories this week are interesting. Some of them are kind of sad. You mentioned that drought one that it's just like, ooh, when I hear that one, I kind of cringe. But it was a good week overall. We've got some travel coming up. So a quick bookkeeping note. I think we're going to cancel the show next week, right?
Yes, we're going to skip next week.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how about this week? How was your week and what did you publish this week?
It's been a hectic week, but this week I published a video on lab-grown meat and how it could potentially help us with climate change. But the big question is, would you actually want to eat cloned lab-grown meat? That's the giant $1 million question. Would you?
So one little thing that people don't think about is we have Impossible Burgers and Beyond Meat now. That is not lab-grown meat. That is a formulation of mushrooms or whatever it is, their secret sauce to make a burger that has the consistency of meat. What you're talking about is completely different. Fantastic video. I watched it 2 days ago. And yes, definitely worth watching. And I don't know. I'm a little torn on that one. That's why I haven't done it myself. I'm super torn on how I feel about that.
Yeah.
Anybody who thinks our current meat situation is super healthy is kidding themselves. So we're not exactly starting from a high ground. But yeah, interesting.
What about you?
Yeah, my video is we had a little delay with our sponsor's approval. So we might be publishing it in like an hour or two. But we did a video on boxable and modular homes, which is something that Matt has done as well. He looked at a bunch of different modular home makers. We focused on Boxable, which is the company where Elon Musk is allegedly hanging out in a boxable $50,000 house owned by SpaceX. So really interesting stuff. And our kind of take was, the ramifications of solving housing like this has really broad-reaching implications. So good stuff.
I actually talked to them and I asked them point blank, I'm like, is Elon living in one? And they said to me, we can neither confirm nor deny, but wink, yeah. they basically admitted it, which was pretty funny.
Yeah, exactly. They're good, really good guys over there. So yeah, good stuff. So let's jump right into it with our very first story. Our headline story this week was about Tesla and how they're claiming that 92% of their battery cell material can now be recovered in their recycling process. So they've alluded to the fact that they want to be a closed loop system where batteries go out, go into cars come back, they recycle the batteries, and the process repeats over and over again. And this really is the nail in the coffin for anybody who says that EVs aren't the answer, because not only do you get 2,000 to 3,000 miles out of them, but afterwards you can recycle all the materials. One thing about this article as I was reading it is they don't mention what it is. They call it their unique battery recycling system. And the reason I mention this is because if you look here, it says, imagine if 1,000 kilowatt hours of battery packs went out. That's about, like 12 or 13 cars, 14, 15 cars. If they were to get them back, they recover all of it via physical separation. That makes sense, right? If you're either like, you're grinding them up or you're doing something to just break the battery material apart, all of it is still there. Like it doesn't get lost. And then the black mass enrichment is 97% effective. And then the purification, where they actually take it and purify the materials into high enough levels for battery packs, results in 95% of it. So imagine that your 1,000 kilowatt hours that went in results in 921 kilowatt hours of battery packs. That's after decades of use and millions of miles of driving or whatever the case might be. This is super awesome news. Now, there are a couple of different ways you can approach this. Typically, you're going to have big grinders. I remember I was talking with a company called Li-Cycle who has kind of this water submerged tech where they just throw all the batteries in water and then they grind them underwater. And the reason is otherwise you have to make sure they're all discharged. So you can kind of skip that step. If there's a little bit of heat that is released, the water absorbs it, no big deal. And you grind this into what they call black mass. The black mass, then, the tricky part, if anybody who knows chemistry, is how do you separate stuff? Like if I kind of think of like the 49er during the gold rush, how do you separate gold from other stuff? Well, you got to figure out, gold is super dense and heavy. So if you were to throw it into anything that you can separate by mass, that helps. Other materials, and there's different approaches. There's also like electrometallurgy, where you actually allow things to precipitate into various substances and then separate those out. Whichever approach you take is kind of the secret sauce, and Tesla hasn't really unveiled anything from what I can tell. But they did mention that this new plant, at least the first phase of it, is fully up and running as of Q4 2020. So that was, 6, 7, 8 months ago. And the company has already recycled 1,300 tons of nickel, 400 tons of copper, 80 tons of cobalt in 2020. So yeah, this is really exciting. And this does finally close the loop on what we've been talking about and why electric vehicles are going to be, the runaway success. And the economics will make sense shortly as well.
Yeah, this is a topic I'm actually very passionate about, because this is like, for me, the missing piece of the puzzle. Once you figure this out, it's kind of like you can run at full speed with producing EVs and battery storage and things like that. And I've also talked to Li-Cycle. Didn't do a video on them specifically, but I have talked to them. I've talked to American Manganese, which is another big player in the market. And what I find fascinating is, but the way American Manganese handles it is they're licensing their technology to be used on location wherever the manufacturing is actually happening, which is exactly what Tesla's talking about doing, because it's the more economical way to do it, because you can tailor the recycling process to the exact chemistries you're actually manufacturing. So it removes a couple pieces from the puzzle. So it reduces the steps you have to take, and then you don't have to transport materials all over the place back and forth. Where Li-Cycle is doing something called the spoke and hub model, where there's a centralized facility that's doing the main processing, and then there's like separate hubs that are collecting and grinding the stuff up to ship it to that central location. So it's two different ways to handle this problem, and one is not necessarily better than the other, because it's going to depend heavily on who needs the recycling done. If you're a major player like Tesla manufacturing gobs of your own batteries, it's probably better to do what they're doing and what American Manganese is doing. But if you're a smaller player and you have smaller amounts of batteries, going with something like Li-Cycle probably makes more sense economically, because you don't have to handle the details yourself. So it's interesting to see which one of these two approaches is going to lead to the best economical return for different companies, and which companies go which direction. Because I know Li-Cycle has a bunch of big players they're partnering with, and the same thing with American Manganese. They have some big players they're partnering with. And when I saw the write-up of how Tesla's handling it, I just wondered, is this going to be a Redwood Materials kind of a thing? It doesn't sound like it, because Redwood Materials is doing recycling on their premises. And then I wondered,
right,
is Tesla doing this on their own, or are they partnering with somebody like American Manganese to help them refine their process? There's no details. I've looked everywhere and I can't find anything on it. So I'm just fascinated to know what they're actually doing.
The tricky part with this is going to give automakers another gauntlet to go through, which is, are you going to build your own batteries, and now are you going to recycle your own batteries?
Yeah.
And if you don't, it'll be harder and harder to compete. Tesla's going to spend a lot of money to stand this up, but when they do, they can turn around, buy their cars back at the end of their life, refurbish the outside, maybe sell them to robo-taxi fleets, take their battery packs, recycle those, when you start to get to that level of vertical integration, it becomes really, really tricky to compete with.
Well,
I
would actually say there's one piece that American Manganese brought up to me again and again, which is scrap. It's not even just getting those batteries back from dead cars. There's a lot of scrap in the production, lots of batteries that don't pass quality assurance. So if they're in the manufacturing line and they get scrapped at the end, you literally just send them to a different side of the warehouse, they get recycled, and they go right back in the front again. So it's that's a huge gain in what you can do for your output just by collecting the scrap. So Tesla's model, in my opinion, is probably the best path forward for big companies like them.
Yeah, so for big companies, if you can afford to stand up your own battery manufacturing, your own recycling, I think it will make sense. But there's also going to be a lot of smaller players. Mm-hmm. And maybe early on, if you're a new startup, maybe you're Rivian or Lucid, maybe you're Arcimoto, one of these other smaller companies, you just say, yeah, Li-Cycle model. I'll have a subscription model where I'll send this stuff off, you guys process it, and we can buy it back from you, or whatever the model might be. And then for the bigger players, maybe they have to stand it all up. But you do feel for these companies, because, GM used to build cars, and now we're talking about they have to become a mining company and a battery company and a recycling company. And it's a tough road. I do think that they're going to have to get to the full stack, just like Tesla will. Otherwise, Tesla's cars are always going to be cheaper, because they're just in this closed loop where they just keep turning it around. But I think time will tell. And I'm really hoping to see more details. I agree with you. I don't think it's Redwood Materials. I think this is purely in-house and it's been really quiet. This might be one of their most stealth projects because I think we know more about everything else about what they do besides this.
I agree. It's going to be cool to see
Anybody
how
in
this
the
pans
comment
out.
section. Yeah, if anybody knows, let us know.
Yeah.
I'd love to know.
Ready for the next story?
Yeah.
All right, so the next up is more Tesla. Tesla finally confirms that the Cybertruck is kind of delayed until 2022. And this was looking more and more likely as time went by because it was delivered by the end of 2021 for the longest time, and yet we weren't seeing any details on it, and the hints kept coming. And during their Q2 2021 financial results last month, they didn't address it directly, but they did say the Cybertruck's going to happen after the Model Y ramps up in the Gigafactory in Texas. So that was the first kind of clue. And then it was a few weeks later, they basically said, yeah, it's not going to happen, because on their website, they've posted this image, which basically says fully refundable. You will be able to complete your configuration as production nears in 2022. So that was the final confirmation. Now, I'm a reservation holder on this. I put my money down way back when. So for me personally, I was not ready to get one in 2021. So I'm actually kind of happy that they're delaying this to 2022, because it lets me kick the can down the road to decide if I'm actually going to go through with it or not. I'm curious, what's your take on the news for this?
I think they should have probably just said this earlier. We could probably all kind of seen this coming. There's just so much that they're working on. And when your factory that you're going to be producing these out of is in progress, and that is tough enough to begin with, I think we should have probably seen it. Part of it is I think Tesla has a weird, we talked about the no PR thing. They have this weird approach where there's so much exciting things that they're always working on. There's AI Day is coming up. So you don't really have too much time to think about the negative. But I think a little bit more of a expectation set would have been good if you just told people, look, odds are if you're early reservation holder, you're going to get it mid-2022, and then move on. We don't have to keep. It's kind of like if you ever had airline delays. Let's say you're at a flight, you're at the gate, and it says, "Oh, delayed 5 minutes," and you know, "Oh no, this is not going to be 5 minutes." But then they go, "Now 5 more minutes," and then 10. If they had just said delayed 4 hours, we're going to take off at 8 o'clock, you might be okay. You go grab your laptop, sit down, grab a bite. But instead, that you just keep kicking it down 5 minutes, and that's infuriating. And that's kind of what has happened a little bit. But you're right. The Cybertruck is so cool, and people have so much excitement that it doesn't really matter. Whenever the Cybertruck is available, the people who want it are going to be so pumped. And until then, you got to just be patient, right? So it'll happen like some other things that they're working on. I think the Roadster, for example, I don't even think it's anywhere near ready. I don't. They did mention that the engineering completed the Cybertruck recently, and I think between engineering complete and manufacturing ready is another huge stage, because you could kind of hand build one thing, but is it optimized for assembly? And the exoskeleton is another major wrinkle. Yeah, I don't think it's a major concern. Any of the Tesla haters out there are gonna say that this was another delay or some silly thing, but the reality is, it's gonna be super cool. They're gonna do it. If you have a reservation, just be patient. It's gonna be awesome. I do think you just got to be patient.
Yeah, the delay doesn't bother me at all. It's on top of which they're not the only one hitting delays. It's like Rivian has had delay issues recently because of the chip shortage. Like Lordstown is having delays. It's like everybody's kind of hitting these hiccups along the way, but it's making it look like 2022 is going to be the year of the truck. Because like I think almost every truck is supposed to be coming out next year. So it's going to be a flood of pickup trucks coming our way.
Jonathan Root says, more time to save for the Cybertruck. Yeah, I'm with you, Matt. If they called me today and they said, "Hey, Ricky, we have your Cybertruck. You ready? Where's our 70K?" I'd be like, "Oh no, we have this money we've saved to go YouTube full time. I'd hate to burn it right away. But if you give me like a year and a half, and then we get it, get some time to get our feet under us, that's a good news for me. Yeah, anybody who's ready and has the cash on hand, yeah, it's a little bit of a disappointment, but it should be. We're gonna be okay. It's gonna get here, and it's gonna be awesome when it does.
Next story.
Yes, the next story is the one. As soon as you were reading it, I was thinking, "Oh man, this is so depressing." But There's a huge California hydropower plant that's shutting down due to drought. So this is the Edward Hydroelectric Power Plant at Lake Oroville in California, and you can see here how low the water level is. They're saying that the lake is currently at about 24% full, which is 34%. It's 34% of the historical average, which is pretty bad. We're in a little bit of a dire strait, to be sure. And the end result of this drought and the fact that we're losing hydropower is we've lost about 1,000 megawatts of capacity. This is a horrible feedback cycle. Because of drought, we don't have water, and because of the fact that we don't have water, we lose the ability to produce electricity, which means we're going to have more, energy produced in dirtier ways, which will lead to more drought. It's a horrible, horrible cycle. The California Department of Water Resources Board is in the process of starting to come down with reduced water requirements. We haven't been hit with anything yet, but they're saying 15%. And this next part is a little bit of a sticking point for me. I think we've alluded to this in the past, but here in California, people don't think about California in terms of like farming. You think, Hollywood and technology and Silicon Valley. We kind of have it all, but we're also like the #1 farming state. We export tons and tons of crops, which is weird for a state that has no water and has no rain. But what ends up happening is we use a lot of our public water for private farming, and that's okay. But we then do stupid things like grow a ton of almonds, and almonds are incredibly water intensive, like a scale of 100 or 1,000x more water intensive than other crops. And California is covered in almond trees. If you ever drive between northern and southern California, look at the different farms, you're going to see a ton of them. And people have long said, this is one of your problems. Knock this off. Don't use public water for growing almonds in a desert, in a very arid conditioned state, and instead use that money for their people. And after that, then we can talk about conserving water. But until then, this feels like a misuse of resources. I don't know if you've ever watched the show Goliath on Amazon.
No.
It's fantastic. Billy Bob Thornton was never my favorite actor, but I watched season 1. It was incredible. And I think season 2 or 3 is about this very topic. They talk about this water resource issue in California. So it is tricky. The immediate answers don't jump off the page, but we need to buckle in and be ready for this, because we also have like record fires. The largest fire in California history is raging right now, with no end in sight, in Northern California. So tough times. I think we need to start to get clever about how we approach the different things like desalination and all that. But what do you think, Matt, as a partial observer?
It makes my heart sink, because it's like another shoe is dropping. It's like, with all the wildfires and the drought that's been going on, this is just another sign of, this is not something that's like the drought comes for a couple years and it goes away and then it kind of comes back. It's like, no, this is just going to keep compounding on itself. It's not going to turn back. This problem's just going to become worse and worse for California, which just makes my heart sink. And it also shows how fragile the kind of utility system is, and how, when you're talking about renewables like hydro, solar, wind, it's very regional. Like, whenever I talk about hydropower or how electricity is generated, I always have at least one person from Canada saying, we're 100% hydro up here. And it's like, that's great, but that doesn't work for pretty much everywhere else. You have to be in a very specific location for that to work. And sadly, kind of the sands are shifting from underneath California, and kind of like, you're not going to be able to rely on hydropower probably going forward. It's just going to get worse and worse in time. But there are other options. It's just that you have to diversify more. But thankfully right now, I think it was like you said, it was 15% of the state's electricity is hydro, which is a lot. But because of this, I think the state really does need to focus on, where's the water use going? Like, growing almonds is insane. Like, why are you allowing that to happen? Like, that's an insane amount of water that's, one, people need for nourishment. It's like, we need desalination plants probably to assist with fresh water. It's like, there's so many things that California needs to be doing to try to get ahead of this. And right now it feels like California, this is as an observer looking in, feels like they're progressive on a lot of things, but they're also kind of being very reactive to other things. And this is where it feels like California is being more reactive than they should be. They need to get ahead of this.
I agree. Really well said. By the way, the knife dude, thank you for your super chat. Really, really kind of you. We appreciate you. There are some questions about who'll get the first EV truck out. We can talk about that in a little bit. Yeah, you're right. And Bong Hollywood mentioned this is what we're talking about with the virtual power plant research that he's doing. That's right. Bong Hollywood is one of our patrons, and he's on our Discord. He's opted into the virtual power plant program that Tesla is providing, which is a great plan. One of the things about hydropower you mentioned, it's one of the few sources of storage, which when that goes away, you're really screwed because the other forms of energy you can't really store. So my wife says maybe Meet Kevin will fix all of this when he becomes governor. She said president. I don't know if you've been following this, but we've got this recall election and stuff happening. Anyways, politics, I've always said aren't going to be the answer. We need good, new, fresh ideas and engineering. But desalination, Rob Womack says, is very energy intensive. It is, and this is the problem. We have to start to figure this out. It is intensive. It's not going to be easy, but we do need to generally, we need to just kind of terraform California and have so much fresh water that we're just turning green and not brown anymore. But yeah, it's a tough situation.
Speaking of politics, we could jump to the next story, which is about Tesla being snubbed by Biden's EV announcement that he did recently. And we were speculating, it was last week, we were speculating about this, that it looked like it was because of Tesla not being a union-friendly company, and that is the truth. It's basically the PR secretary came out and basically had said, yes, it's because this event was for the auto workers union, which is why Tesla wasn't there. So for me, my basic take on this is I don't see this as a big deal, personally. This is why I'm really curious to hear what Ricky's thoughts are, because I don't know if we're going to be aligned on this. My take on this was when it happened, I was like, big deal, who cares? And as the week's gone on, it's kind of like, still, big deal, who cares? And part of the reason for that is that this press briefing and this executive order signing that Biden did was about transitioning gas car companies into electric. And that's not what Tesla is. Tesla is 100% electric today. And yes, they are the leading EV manufacturer right now in the world. And they spearheaded this and they helped make this happen. Yes. But at the same time, it's like they didn't need to be there, because this is more about the companies like GM and Ford trying to get them to switch over to electric. So I understand from a policy point of view why it made more sense to have them there. The only part of this that didn't make sense to me was they didn't even acknowledge Tesla. They didn't even mention their name in the whole event, which I thought was a little awkward. But at the same time, this is a politics press event. They're glad handing. They're trying to placate the auto workers union and get them on board and show support. So it was geared towards the auto workers union. When it comes down to it, policy is what matters, not these press junkets. So it's like, what's the policy? And when it comes down to the policy, Tesla is part of this process, because you've got the infrastructure bill is going to be helping Tesla out with all the money that's going to be going to the charging infrastructure that Tesla will be experiencing. The EV tech, the rebates that are coming out. Tesla, when you buy a Tesla, you're still going to get $10,000 off your car for the rebate. So it's not like Tesla's been left out in the cold. The policy does cover Tesla. It was just this press junket. And for me, I was just kind of like, whatever, it doesn't matter. This is just, politics being politics. And it didn't matter to me. I'm curious what your take is. I don't know if you'll be in the same camp or not.
I think this is bad for the industry, and the reason why I say this is because there's this, people don't think, oh, it's Tesla and the Mach-E and the ID4 versus gas car. There's this like very tribal sense that it's Tesla versus all these other companies, and there's a lot of hate. And this does not help matters. This is complete nonsense. If it wasn't for Tesla, these presidents and these jokers would not be standing here doing this. The lobbyists and the oil companies have fought this for decades. So, Tesla should have like a national, the day that Tesla was founded should be a national holiday as far as I'm concerned, because that's how impactful what they've done has been. And I think you and I agree about this. We want we want to see what Tesla has done, and we want to see everybody else follow suit, and for positive things to happen. But if people are divided the way they are, I don't think that serves them well. Here's a this is from that article. I'm AF. I believe that's angry as F, because of the blatant disrespect to Elon and his 18 years of hard work. He, however, is doing bigger things and focused on SpaceX missions. None of the leaders from Legacy Auto will ever hold a candle to him, and all they have is their car companies. Liz Gibson. So that's from a Tesla fan. And if you look at Twitter, it's full of the same kind of sentiment. And that's the last thing we need. I'd like to see more unity between Tesla, like people who love Tesla, and the others. But at every turn, it's this kind of foolish nonsense. And I've always told you, like, politics is a largely useless enterprise. It's not beneficial or valuable to people. Great people, smart people who do great work. That's what we need. So to that point, like, I didn't watch this event. I don't care. I don't care about politics very much, but it's bad because I think it'll continue to drive that wedge between them. As far as the unionized workforce and stuff, yeah, this is the politics of it, right? The Democratic Party is largely, their biggest contributors are typically Auto Workers Association unions and teachers unions and things like that. So they're going to coddle and kind of play to them. But that doesn't all have to be bad. But I really do want to see the Tesla fans and the others get along better. So for that reason, let's hope that some positive or future things will change. And to not even mention Tesla is stupid. If you're not going to invite them because they're not unionized, fine. But you should start by saying we should talk about how this started, right?
Yes.
General Motors was there. They literally rounded up electric cars and were crushing them, and it's just laughable to people. And I get that. So really, if you just flip it around and have a little humility and give credit where credit is due, this could have been a positive event for me. But that does bug me a little bit.
Yeah, that's the one thing I do agree with is the fact that they didn't even say the name Tesla at all during the event is where it's kind of like, what's wrong with you guys? Like, you didn't invite them, I get it, but why did you not even mention, here's the company that's helping to spearhead the shift to EV, and these other companies are now saying that they're going to help get there by 2030, and it's like, you could have easily crafted it in a way that would have made the Auto Workers Union happy and still acknowledged the history of how we got here. But yeah, I come back to, it's like, it's ultimately the policy that matters. It's like, I didn't watch this event. I didn't care about this event. So it's like the only people that really care about this event would be like the Autos Workers Union and people that are in that space. It's like, it to me, I know why you're saying it's driving a wedge, but I feel like Tesla fans, and as somebody who's a fan of Tesla, it's like, I think we need to kind of stop feeling like the under guy, like little dog, like we're like trying to fight up, like, oh, it's a little scrappy guys. We are not the underdogs here. Tesla is the top dog. And so it's like, we don't need to throw a punch in this fight. We can basically just step back and go, whatever, just come on. It's like, come on, guys. And that's the attitude I've got on this. It's part of the reason Tesla's just crushing it. So who cares if they weren't invited? They're come on. It's just that's part of the reason why I don't care.
Yeah, there's two kinds of fans. There's Tesla fans who want to see all the other companies convert over to electric, all these factories that used to make gas polluting cars like shut down and retool for electric. And then there's fans who hate these other companies. And that's what I really hope that you can separate the two. Like, just these kinds of events, don't let that drive a wedge. If there's a car company who's shutting down a plant and retooling it to make electric, like, cheer for that, even if these silly stories come up.
Yes.
Unnamed Man 001 says Stellantis was there. Stellantis is this conglomerate of all the losers, basically. It's like the Fiats and the Dodge and the cars I would never touch or I would never buy all together. What could go wrong? But they were there, and they have nothing electric. They have like a silly new Jeep that's like a plug-in hybrid, I think, and they have a plug-in hybrid Pacifica. I mean, they have nothing, and they're there. It's truly embarrassing, I think, at that point when I don't know. It's a weird one for sure, but I hope all of us who want to see sustainable transportation can not let this kind of stuff get to us, because this has changed nothing for me. I want to see Volkswagen, for example, is doing really big things. The ID4 is selling, like, I think they've sold about half of what Tesla's doing, which is huge for a company that was mired in Dieselgate 5 years ago. So we have to kind of be forgiving and hope that good things do come out of this. So I'm
Well,
optimistic still, but
well said. I agree with that sentiment completely. It's like we need to root for this. Tesla cannot solve this problem, period. They cannot make enough cars. We need all these manufacturers to shift over because that's the only way we can make enough cars to do this. So Tesla needs their help. The world needs their help. We need to root them on when they're doing the right stuff. And when they're not doing the right stuff, we call them on it.
and no one company, no one's gonna. Everybody can't agree to one thing. I don't care how great your vacuum cleaner is. Someone's gonna hate you for some reason. That's just how it goes, right?
Yes.
Doesn't matter how great the Ford F-150 is. Somebody says it sucks, and I'm a Dodge Ram guy. That's human nature. We need choices, and in a capitalist society, we need to have We need to have a lot of options out there. So, yeah. Somebody mentioned that the Pacifica is a fantastic car. I wish. I always joked with my wife, if it was the Honda Pacifica and it was a plug-in hybrid, we would have probably gotten one a couple years ago. I just don't have the most faith in their cars and stuff. But glad to hear that you've had good news with it. But that's the point, right? We have to have 20 companies and 100 cars. That's the only way. You can't. There are people who will never buy a Tesla, but like the Ford F-150 has got them excited, or the Mach-E. So that's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. We should have a car for everybody.
And we have a super chat from Bill Bar. Thank you so much, Bill. If they allow existing car companies to create plug-in hybrids by adding a small battery to qualify for the $12,000 subsidy, it will drastically slow progress to remove ICE vehicles. Agree 100%.
Agreed.
Yes.
Agreed.
Plug-in hybrids
it
should
can't
not
be
be part of this. Can't. Stupid.
I completely agree. And I'm hoping. I actually didn't think this was the case, and if it is, they need to address it because that's terrible. And you're right, it'll actually slow things down than where we were before.
Well, let's get to the next story, the last story, which
The
I
last
think is
story.
you. Yeah.
Yes. So the last story is, here's what the U.S. needs to do to meet snowballing demand for batteries. Okay. This story, I think, is one of those stories that we should be thinking about whenever you see kind of change on the horizon. One of the things that like futurists like to do is look at the various aspects of what it will take to sustain it and try to get ahead of it. Like, for example, when like the rise of personal computing was happening, there's going to be a huge demand for silicon. Luckily, silicon is really abundant, so there was no concern there. But here with batteries, we need to be thinking about batteries in terms of manufacturing, mining, sourcing, all of it, right? So, like, for example, in the U.S., we don't really have a lot of battery companies. If you remember, there was this company called A123 that was going to revolutionize everything, but they went belly up. Last week, there's a company called Core Power that just built a factory in Arizona. It's a wholly American company. It's not like Panasonic, a Japanese company operating in the Gigafactory, which we have a little bit of that going on. But we need to be talking about the shift, right? So the article talks about, if there was a person who was working in a car assembly plant, they don't need to have a chemistry PhD, but they need to know how to work on a battery cell line, right? If that's what they need to shift to. And I think there's probably three things to it. The first is we have to get manufacturing back in the US. I've always said this. In the past, we've outsourced it because there were people who had skills and there were no local opportunities. That's going to change. Have you seen some of the cars in the competition? The Chinese EV market, they've got some really good cars. The South Korean market, the Ionic, those are incredibly awesome cars. The competition is going to be pretty fierce. And so what we're going to see is battery supplies. If you think you're just going to outbid people and have contracts, you're going to be wrong. Your cars are going to sit waiting on batteries if you don't get this figured out. This is why Ford isn't building more F-150s. They're still figuring out the supply of battery supply. So more manufacturing. We need to retrain maybe some of the younger the younger generation going to college or high school. We need to make sure that there's enough people to fill these jobs because there's shortages both in terms of finding qualified candidates and even having enough manufacturing capabilities here in the US. So I think in the next 10 years, this problem is currently kind of bad. It's going to be horrible to the point where every EV you make will require batteries from some other country. And the minute you're beholden to that, and except Tesla, because Tesla's proven that they're going to be figuring out every part of this and they're going to be completely vertically integrated. But what does that mean for everybody else? If you're GM and you don't have that same strategy, how are you going to buy supply? Or if you're a small company and you're not, like Lucid and Rivian are not going to be building their own cells anytime soon, and they shouldn't. They should stay focused on building cars. Well, then how are you going to get supply, right? This is probably the challenge of the decade. We've probably both alluded to this in the past, but I think we got to figure this out, and we need to make sure that we are retraining and preparing for this, because these kinds of things you can't just flip a switch and be ready for this. We're still suffering with software engineers. Part of why I made the switch and taught myself software is because I remember reading articles about how like there aren't enough Americans who can do these jobs, and so they're looking around and they pay huge amounts of money. Anybody in the audience, if you're thinking about a second career or a first career, chemistry, batteries, software, these are things you'll never be unemployed. I quit my software job over a month ago. I still get 2 emails a day. Hey, how do you want to come interview for this software position? There's so much demand for this stuff. So the smart person, the organized, or the forward-looking person kind of sees that coming. So that's really where we need to be as a country, really, and maybe even the world at large. What's your take?
Well, for me, the part of this that really resonated with me in that interview was the hammering home of the point that we do a great job in this country, from all of our colleges and universities and research groups, that we have this amazing scientific kind of setup where we're doing great research and battery breakthroughs and all this different kind of stuff, but it's about the science of it. So it's like you're proving the science of this chemistry, but you're not necessarily looking at how would you actually make that an actual thing that you can replicate and create millions of cells doing this thing. It's more about just proving, can you do it? And what's the energy density of this little battery cell that you created in a lab? And something I always hit on a lot of my videos, I always say it's really hard to go from lab to mass manufacturing. It's incredibly difficult. I mean, Elon's even said that's actually the hardest part. The easiest part is coming up with the idea. The hardest part is figuring out how to make it at scale. And so for me, that was the part that he was hitting on that I thought was so perfect, of like colleges and universities need to spend more time when you're doing research in a way that you're researching how can this actually be mass manufactured. There was a research I was doing a couple months ago on solar cell technology and like a breakthrough in solar cell technology. And the university that was doing the research on it was building their cells in their research lab using the exact machines that are used in actual solar manufacturing plants. And they were doing it this way to try to figure out, can we do it with the existing material, with the existing machines, the existing tooling, or do we have to modify it in a little way? And they were, as part of the research, trying to figure out the most cost-effective way to actually make the cell at the same time. So when they come out and say, we have a breakthrough technology, it's like they can immediately say, and you can spin this up on your tooling system in months. So it's like, that's the kind of thing that this interview was trying to hit on. And for me, that was the one that resonated most.
It's a really good point. Really good point. John said, I think if a lot of people really looked into the new curriculum in grade schools, you might be quite shocked. Like eliminating cursive. I remember that's always been a sticking point for people.
Do you have one I write by hand today? Like virtually never.
Almost never. You're not true. That's true.
Yeah. We have a
we had a super chat.
Yep. Want to read it?
Sure. So Eric is one of my favorites. Thank you so much, Eric, as always. He says, amen. The political haters must stop. Bill is on top of it. I think he was talking about Bill O'Barr, who meant more about the subsidies for hybrids and stuff. So, yeah, I think this kind of ties into education a little bit, to retraining people. This is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but we do have, I think, Andrew Yang has this principle or this idea that we need to have like a universal basic, and his thesis is that he sees a lot of disruption happening. There'll be people who are going to have a tough time fitting into a future where there are no, like, remedial jobs that are paying low skill. We're going to automate a lot of that stuff away. And the reason why he says it is that he doesn't think it's practical, like, this idea that everyone, anything, that's probably not true. Maybe not everybody could, be a rocket scientist or a software engineer or something like that. But I think we need to invest in retraining, right? If you run in a coal plant, how do we get this person to now be, they deal with, they're very familiar with like chemicals or like safety procedures and stuff. I think that person within a month or two would be trained to be like a battery cell operator on a factory line or something. So really it's more about thinking about the future and adjustments that we have and shifts in thinking to get there. Education is probably a huge part of it because we don't just need the laborers, the people in the factory. We need the really smart people who are doing the research. Um, uh, we fall behind researchers done in other countries, and they start taking the lead on some of this kind of stuff. So education, is, I've always said, is
Yes.
your like trailing marker. It takes 20. Banned all schools today. You're not going to notice anything until like 18 years from now or something. So it's a really tricky indicator to track and to gauge, but hugely important. That's where I'd like to see my investment.
I agree,
In
100%.
terms of like, when I pay.
Yeah, this is decades in a shift we're going to see. We're not going to see changes in 5 years. It's going to be changes in 15, 25 years. It's that kind of a range, which is sad because like we're all impatient and we all want it now, but it's like this is going to be something that we'll have to shape up and shift for decades to build back up that manufacturing expertise and get the skill sets in place through better education. And this kind of links to what you were just talking about Andrew Yang's kind of income. I was reading a recent article about research into the shortage of labor we have today after the pandemic, where all these people got money from the government so they didn't have to worry about their paychecks. And some of them were actually making more money than they were at their previous job. And now these companies are opening back up and having trouble finding employees again. And the assumption is we're overpaying people. They don't want to come back to work. They're lazy. And this research was actually showing, actually, that's not the case. One of the big things that's actually happened is during this time period where people were earning money just to stay home and stay safe, many people have shifted careers. They've gone back to school. They've, because they had this money and they had the time and the availability to actually go and retrain in something different. So they're no longer going back to restaurants to work, as a line cook. They've completely shifted and now they're going back to school to be a legal assistant or something like that. So that kind of ties into what you're talking about is we need to invest in education and give the people that want to shift the opportunity to shift, because sometimes they can't because they just don't have the means. So we have to invest in that future to try to get this skill set built up so that we can get manufacturing back in the United States.
Yeah, our current system. I mean, we spend a lot of money on social programs and on everything. Like every country, we have all these problems. We all spend everybody schools, even though our schools are terrible. We spend a ton of money on safety net programs and stuff. But the problem, incentive structure is so terrible. What you're telling people is, no income, we'll give you money. Oh, you have now? We're taking that money back. Instead, if that's such a way to approach it, because now you're making people think to go work at Walmart for 80 hours a week or stay at home. UBI is cool, and because it's just a baseline, meaning no American is going to be begging on the street. And if you see one, don't give them money because everybody's getting a UBI is the idea, right? So you can pay rent or pay groceries. You're not living in California. Eric says, people have been saying that I'm breaking up. Do you hear that as well?
You're kind of clipping every once in a while where you just kind of freeze for a split second.
Okay. I'm afraid to mess with my internet settings here, but we'll just kind of jump more.
Do you have anything syncing in the background?
No, it's not that. It could be that I'm on Wi-Fi instead of the hardwire, which kind of that. With some sort of a flatline price, no one's going to be rich, but you have comfort. You can pay your groceries, and then from there you'll get another job and you make even more money, right? It's like a basic decency program, which is something I'm in favor of. And if everybody could just deep breath, take and read a new book or take a class or do something, we would have way more accessibility and upward mobility than we have today, where the poorest of us have the least time to do anything. It's a horrible.
You're getting called out in the comments. What are you doing on Wi-Fi? Wi-Fi is the problem. Ricky on Wi-Fi shakes head in disappointment. Well, let's just take that. So, I think that kind of wraps up the main part of the story. So we could just transition to the Q&A portion of the show and start kind of going through the comments and having a chat with you guys. Are you able to plug in, or are you just completely on Wi-Fi right now?
No. If you go to full screen of yourself, give me a minute and I'll set that up.
All right. Oh, I love it. So what do you guys think about that? Do you have any thoughts on putting funding behind education and giving people a chance to shift? Let's see. Yeah, Lionel said, yep, a lot of folks discovered that they didn't need to go back to their really awful job that didn't pay a living wage. That's exactly what happened. The New York Times had an interview with a bunch of people, and one of the people they interviewed was literally a line cook. And he was like the grueling hours, working in that heat, and he just got so burned out he didn't want to do it. And so when the restaurant shut down and he went onto the pay assistance program, it gave him an opportunity to kind of go back to school and study something completely different and go into a completely different job. So he just got out of the cooking game completely because it was just a grueling, grueling job. So to me, that's a sign that there's probably a lot of people out there that are looking for opportunities and just can't do it because they're having trouble making ends meet.
Hear me now?
Yep. Are you back?
Hopefully, it should be better now. I think we will give it a little bit of time and we'll see. Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about the line cook. Some of the jobs that we have change. Nothing new. That's kind of always the way it was. There was a or factory and people lived on their own. And now we have, centralization. Maybe we're moving a little bit more towards decentralization. Everybody should remember that opportunities are in front of us, and we just need kind of time and to seek them.
You're still
A
stuttering.
little.
Yeah. Huh.
I'll read comments and stuff. You can.
Well, thank you very much,
Robert,
Eric
if you
Stark.
might-
He said he really enjoys us. Intelligent conversation. Definitely worth watching. Thank you so much. Robert says Ricky might be using Starlink. Smiles.
I saw that. Big Skipper says, I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on Everyday Astronaut Base Tour and definitely recommend watching if you haven't. Have you
Yes.
watched it yet?
I've watched the first 2 parts. I haven't watched part 3 yet. It is, for me, the best part of those videos is not what we're seeing about Starlink. It's what Elon is talking about and how he talks about these things. And you can start to see into his brain and how he thinks and how he works and how he always is challenging engineering assumptions and how he likes to organize teams, because it's very easy for engineers to not communicate with each other. And then you're designing a thing that you don't need to be designing, but you're designing it because you thought somebody else said we needed to do that. And so it's like always challenging these assumptions, and that smart people make stupid decisions because of bureaucracy and the way things are organized. And it's just, for me, it's just awesome to see into the way he thinks. And I don't know if he'd be good at this, but it feels like he should be teaching a CEO class for other CEOs to understand how they should be looking at their business and be challenging assumptions and trying to find ways to optimize and think differently and think outside the box. Because I don't know about you, I've worked at companies where I just do face palms half the time of like, why was that decision made? Or, wow, that was a waste of 6 months. We just backpedaled completely because the people at the top weren't listening to what the people at the bottom were saying. So it's funny. I just love hearing him talk to hear how he thinks.
He had a quote on Twitter recently. He said, if lobbying and lawyers could get you to outer space, then virgins would already be on Pluto. Thing. And I think what I love is I've always had that sentiment. I've always believed, like in a society, we'd have a lot of designers and engineers and no lawyers, right? That's the ideal society. But because we're not ideal, we have people who steal your IP. We need lawyers. But as we build a better and more ideal society, let's remember the goal is not to have a bunch of lawyers. That's something I think Elon is big on. I talk to some car companies, and you can just tell the ones that are run by lawyers. Yeah. Like you talk to them, and you're just like, "Are you kidding me right now with this? I can't do this because of blank. I have to do." And then there's Tesla, who is the opposite. They're run by engineers, and what I see is that finally that is starting to translate into the biggest company doing the biggest thing. And I'm hoping that becomes a rubric for how we go forward. Like, get more designers, get more engineers or scientists to work on the product, not on IP trolling or anything else. And I think we're the better for it.
Yep.
You need attorneys and lawyers and stuff. It's not like we need none, but less of them and more engineers. I think that's the way to do it.
Thank you for the super sticker, Rob. Rob Womack gave us a thumbs up. Thank you so much. Like, people are still saying the problem is that Ricky is not using Starlink.
As soon as Starlink is available in my latitude, you bet.
Yeah, we actually know somebody that had tried to use Starlink for live streaming, Nikki from Transport Evolved, and she said it is not good for live streaming at all. It's not reliable enough yet.
So Michael Attoon, he says, NVIDIA, AMD, all things Elon are run by engineers and they're boom. That's a fantastic example. Two of my CEOs, not besides Elon, are NVIDIA CEO and AMD's. They're freaking geniuses is what they are. And they are absolutely crushing it. Lisa Su, I think, is CEO of AMD. Anyways, I watch all her keynotes. What's really cool is when a really technical scientific person is also a presenter and a leader, and that's what she is around. She's just a star human being, and she has taken AMD and kind of from kind of obscure and irrelevance, cutting edge, leading the way in terms of what they're doing. The Model S has an AMD CPU in it for their PS5 level gaming graphics stuff. So
the best CEOs I've ever worked for are people that aren't necessarily engineers. Some of them have been engineers and were exceptional, but the key to me was not that they were engineer. It was that because of who they are, they're actually the ideal end user for whatever that product is. They know the product inside and out, how it works, and why it's important to the end user. Those are the CEOs that have always made the best decisions because they can look at it through the lens of the user experience and why it needs to be optimized the way it has to be optimized. And when you ask them, like, how does this work? They can tell you every nut and bolt of how the thing comes together. The CEOs that are more just like, I went and got my MBA and they're not the end user, those are the worst CEOs I've ever worked for because they're not the end user. They don't get the user. They don't care. It's like, it's when you care about the actual product and you actually care about learning how it actually comes together. Those are the best.
I completely agree. That's I kind of lump designers in this bucket because both care about the end product. The different thinks about different than the engineer, but the two of them, you put designers and engineers together, good things happen. I've had the same experience with my CEOs as well. Billow Bar asks, Ricky, is Dishy McFlatface in your future? Yeah, as soon as as soon as Starlink is available. What I really want is I want a mobile Starlink for my army, so I could just wherever I go up in the mountains, the more obscure and desolate, the better the connectivity. And yeah, count me in.
Starlink's going to be my future when I move to my new house. Like the internet out there is garbage, so I'm going to be doing that too.
A question which makes me, again, this gets to why I don't really care about politics. I feel largely pointless, but he says, does a Ford Mach-E, the Ford Mach-E count as an American-made Union EV? I don't know the technical answer to this, but I mean, some part of the drivetrain or some X was built here by union workers, and this in the final assembly. These companies run by lawyers, they know how to play this game, right? And find loopholes and stuff. So that's where the lawyers come in, right? You got the engineers to make something great, and then the lawyers will figure out how to skirt all loopholes and stuff. So I don't know, but the Ford F-150 will be made in America, and that's going to be the next thing. So
we're getting a lot of Claudia and Michael Attoon, and a lot of people saying it's time to hit that like button. So just want to put that out there. I agree. Time to hit that like button. It really does help.
Yeah. Michael says we need more billionaires doing great stuff like Elon. Richard Branson, you can say, and Jeff Bezos, who've got other rocket companies, space companies, they're kind of following suit to various different ends, but I agree. When you don't have to worry about money and you can just kind of be a little crazy like Elon can, look what you can accomplish. It's pretty amazing.
Dustin Cybercrops said video game devs are OP CEOs. I worked in the video game industry for quite a while, and one of my favorite CEOs, he was a gamer. So it's like he knew video games. And so he was always pushing us in ways to make just these amazing games and make a better product because he knew and he cared and he knew every aspect of how things came together, and he had a background in development. So it's like it was like the perfect mix. So yes.
Have you watched, is it Mythic Quest?
Yeah.
Apple TV Plus.
I got to tell it's extreme, but I can't tell you how accurate that show is. It's so accurate.
I figured that'd be the case. A big thank you to Pure Vita for your super chat. He says, in order for Lake Powell and Glen Canyon and Hoover Dam to continue to produce power, Blue Mesa Reservoir had to release water about 20 feet for the next 9 weeks. And you got to figure that has some cascading impacts to other plants and other reservoirs in that area. So this is a big issue. We've had droughts before. This one does feel different to me than the last one we had. The major one was maybe 5 years ago. Everything does keep getting worse. So again, more reason why I always say, if there's a company who build an electric vehicle to sell to you, let's not poo-poo on them. Let's give them a shot, especially if they're good cars. Let's give everybody a chance. I think we need more of that. Kamion, I might be pronouncing that wrong, says Apple should start desal. They have more money than they know what to do with. That is a fantastic idea. If you have $200 billion in a bank, just start doing some good stuff for the world. Would you just like get off your butt, go start a desalination plant? Why not? It could be the Apple water, and you can charge twice as much for it. I don't know, but do something.
I will say, of all the big tech companies out there, Apple is leading the path on renewables and getting their carbon footprint to zero. Like they are
right, and recyclability
way ahead. They're on the recycling, everything, generating power for their buildings. It's like everything. So it's like we do have to give them some props, but at the same time, they could do way more because they have a big piggy bank that they're not doing anything with.
By the way, I was talking to one of my friends who is he's a civil engineer in the building industry. And he mentioned that the next California building code, doesn't know if it's going to be the next one or the one after that, which would be 2028. So we don't know the exact time, will require batteries in all new construction. So the previous building code added solar. So any new home built in California based on some has to have solar. That's already, and the next one will be batteries as well. Kind of cool, right? I'll make a video or talk about it more when I know more, but it's kind of a breaking thing, and that could be absolutely huge. And I think
gonna be massive.
With these fires roving around, it's going to be important. Yeah.
Unnamed man said floating solar on reservoirs can reduce evaporation. Yeah, I've actually been looking into floating solar a lot, and recently again. There are so many things that you can do with solar panels that help reduce evaporation. Like you put them over crops as agrovoltaics, and it helps reduce the evaporation and how much water it takes to water those crops. So it's like we talked about all the water needed for making almonds. It's like there might be a path where you could put solar above different kinds of farming and reduce the water usage of that farm. In India, they're putting them above canals, which helps to reduce the evaporation of the canals. So there's so many different things we can do.
I completely agree. You'll get comments from people about solar, like, "Oh, what happened after the toxic chemicals to produce them, and when they died, disposing of 30 years. You know how long 30 years is? It's such a brainer, and it's infuriating to hear people. Like we always talk about, right? Suddenly everybody is an environmentalist when you talk about mining for lithium and and manufacturing solar panels. But Yeah, Dave. So David says the black plastic balls in the LA reservoir help with evaporation. They do. They actually also help with the formation of some other.
Yep.
It was actually the primary factor was the formation of some chemical that was kind of toxic.
Yep.
They found out about it because plant it was clean, but then under the sun, uh, um, was it a bromide or I'm not sure exactly what it was now. I'd have to look into it, but some compound was formed. And it was harmful or in levels with enough concentration to be harmful.
But imagine if they had put solar panels over that instead of black balls, and then you'd be killing two birds with one stone. You'd get the same results, plus you'd be generating a lot of power. So I don't know.
Deb Data says, Ricky, time to get the 1 gigabit fiber, fastest internet I can get. And it still drives me crazy that it's not, I have 1 gigabit down, but only 5 megabit up, which is the problem.
Yep.
So the day I can get fiber, I'll be leaving, and for sure. I've threatened to move cable. Not serious. I'm joking. I'm not joking. I'm serious. I've threatened to move how much I hate dealing with the monopoly that is our cable companies.
Yeah, that's the situation I'm going to be moving into. My only option is cable. It's like 35 megabits up is not going to, no, not going to work.
Brian Gurr says, California housing is easy. How is it going to be? Solar. When you're building houses, solar and batteries are a small part. Unlike other places, like if you were to mandate solar batteries in most of the country, that'd be really crippling. The houses in my neighborhood cost $1 million and more. So what's $30,000? It's not such a big percentage of it. So I get perspective on that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's not like it's a $150,000 home that you're suddenly tacking on this $50,000 extra. It's $1 million home with a $50,000 extra. It's at that point, it's no offense, it's pocket change at that point. Sadly.
And especially with how much electricity costs. Yeah.
Yep. We're at time. Yep. Any parting words, Ricky?
So Tesla AI Day next week. I'm going to be on travel. I'm going to be in, so this will be fun, and we'll have a video about this, but I'm going to be in Canada, in Montreal, meeting with Nouveau Monde, the graphite mine. They do a lot of the graphite in America, which goes into all of our batteries. And they've got plans, totally renewable, and switching over pillar electric mining equipment, the big augers and drills and excavators and stuff. Kind of cool partnership. I'm going to go try to talk to them and figure out what's going on over there. Should be really fun. But next week we're not going to be around, and we'll see you guys the week after that. Thanks as always.
And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss an episode. And we're live every Thursday except for next week, but we're usually live every Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. And you can always listen to the podcast version on the go at viceversa.show. And as always, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.